Let's bring in MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin and UCLA law professor Rick Hasen. Good to see both of you. Rick, I want to zero in right there on what the White House is arguing, that the officials overseeing election security must be personally totally aligned. Less than 4 months before an election that is going to determine the control of Congress, what did you hear in those comments?
Well, this is certainly a flex by the president. Last month, the Supreme Court decided 2 cases, one the Slaughter case, the other the Cook case. The Slaughter case says the president can fire the head of independent agencies. The Cook case says, well, there's at least one exception for the Federal Reserve. So I think it's going to end up being tested in court if any of the fired commissioners want to do so. Whether or not the EAC, the Election Assistance Commission, falls on the Federal Reserve side of the line where there is a real need to have some independence from the president, or whether it's going to be treated like most other agencies, falling on the Slaughter side of the line, giving the president the power to fire. I think that this may be a prelude to the president trying to use the EAC to make changes in election rules.
Well, Rick, I mean, remind us what this commission is actually supposed to do and how big a deal this kind of change or potential political interference in their job would actually be.
Well, first of all, the EAC, which most people probably have not heard of, was created after the 2000 disputed Florida election led to the Help America Vote Act, a bipartisan bill which Congress passed in 2002. Mostly what it does is certify voting machines and provide money to states and advice to states that are engaged in election administration. But the thing that it does that I think Trump probably cares about is it's the one that sets out the federal form that's used for voter registration. That's a form that every state has to accept for people who want to vote in federal elections. That form in particular, Trump has tried through his executive orders, tried to change that form to require documentary proof of citizenship. So show your birth certificate, your marriage license, your naturalization certificate before you can register to vote. So far, the courts have said Trump can't tell the EAC to do this. The president doesn't have a role to play here. But I think this might be a play to try to find another way to get the EAC through Trump to make this kind of change to the federal form, which would have very big disenfranchising effects around the country.
Lisa, as Rick said just a moment ago, this seems almost certain to make its way through the courts. Given what we just saw with the Slaughter decision, what would you expect to happen?
Well, first of all, I think it will depend entirely, Antonia, on whether the fired commissioners have a will to litigate this or whether after the Slaughter decision, they see this like the White House does as a foregone conclusion. I agree with Rick that somebody may take a swing at this, but I'm not as sanguine about what their chances are. And that's because in the Slaughter decision itself, the majority of the court said there are some reasons to think that some agencies might be distinguished, but they gave sort of 2 examples. One would be the Federal Reserve based on its extensive history and its differentiated powers. They say that the Federal Reserve isn't necessarily using executive power. And then they say that there may also be exceptions for people, for example, non-tenured judges appointed by the Department of Justice who oversee immigration proceedings. Maybe they'll leave that to another day. But for the most part, the Slaughter decision stands for the proposition that even where you have commissions with multiple members who are supposed to be bipartisan as enacted by statute, that if the president feels that he cannot work with one or more of those commissioners, it is entirely within his executive authority to fire them. And in fact, I think the Slaughter decision, just based on my own reading, is so broad that it might allow the president to even fire civil servants. I said that in the wake of the Slaughter decision, and I think that's something that will be litigated as well. But I think Rick is right to say somebody may try to litigate this. The question is whether it's the fired commissioners themselves who are likely the only people who have standing to challenge it.
Rick, give me the big picture of the environment. We're just 116 days out from the midterms. We know that this administration is also planning to send election monitors to key states, including swing states. The president keeps pushing the Save America Act that many people warn really has nothing to do with its name, but would make it incredibly hard for millions of people to vote. And then you have this.
Right. Well, there's a lot more going on. We also saw the threat to cut off emergency FEMA funds to states that don't make changes to their voting systems. There's also the attempt to try to use the Postal Service to refuse to deliver mail ballots and let states jump through certain hoops that the Trump administration wants in order to cull the rolls from supposed non-citizens. This is kind of a multi-front attack on the integrity of elections. I guess I'd add in there, too, that the president has hollowed out CISA, the cybersecurity agency that is aimed at trying to help protect elections. I see this move at the EAC at the very least going to make it harder for state and local election officials, who are the ones who actually have to run the elections, to be able to do so with integrity. And it's just going to further those conspiracy theories that Trump pushes about elections being rigged. It's really just another bad development, a series of attacks on the voting system, unprecedented by the federal government.